Hey everyone, let's talk about slavery today. Martin Bashir just resigned from MSNBC after his broadside against Sarah Palin, which was so controversial. And I have to say that I'm very sympathetic to Martin Bashir. I thought he was a very bright guy. I thought he had a good heart. And I also thought that he put his finger on a very interesting trend in our politics, which is the Republican fixation on slavery. Yes, it seems like any time conservatives disapprove of an Obama policy, it tends to get equated with slavery. And I think that's happening for a couple reasons. First of all, I think it feels very good for conservatives to try to turn the tables, since slavery has always been a progressive issue over the last 300 years, ever since abolitionism came into being. And so I think that there's a kind of a jujitsu going on where they'd like to claim this issue for their own. And second of all, I think that there are a number of actors in the conservative movement who just love publicity. And it's become clear to people that if you want to make waves, if you want people to pay attention to you, at least for 5 minutes, if you mention slavery, that will help your cause. Now, Sarah Palin doesn't know a lot about many things, but one thing she does know about is publicity. Sarah Palin knows PR. And the important thing to understand about Sarah Palin in this context is that she's just put out a book. So every moment of her waking life now is dedicated to garnering publicity for her new book. So here she is at the Ohio Faith and Freedom Coalition's fundraiser at the Ohio State Fairgrounds. And she's giving a speech and says, and I quote, "Our free stuff today is being paid for by taking money from our children and borrowing from China. When that money comes due, and this isn't racist, we'll be like slavery when the note is due. We are going to be beholden to the foreign master," end quote. Now, there are so many things wrong with this statement, I hardly know where to begin. But let me begin with the first 3 words, our free stuff. Free stuff is another sort of mantra of conservatism these days. There are all kinds of references to free stuff that are made. You may recall that during Mitt Romney's 47% speech, he also referred to free stuff. But if you ask somebody, what kind of free stuff are you talking about exactly? Are you talking about veterans benefits? Is that free stuff? When the people who defend our country get benefits, that's free stuff? If you talk about Medicare, is that free stuff? How about Social Security? Is that free stuff? I assume that if you ask a conservative that, if you ask Sarah Palin that, she'll say, no, I'm not referring to that. But she's specifically talking about things that drive up the debt. This is a statement about the debt that she's making. And the only things that drive up the debt are the big ticket items like Social Security and Medicare. If all you're talking about is food stamps, that's not a major driver of the debt. Free stuff becomes an easy thing to say when it's sort of an empty catchphrase. It's much harder to defend when you have to identify what that free stuff is. But let's move on to the slavery part of her statement. Taking money from our children and borrowing from China. Now, what she's doing here is perpetuating a great myth about our debt, which is the idea that China is the greatest holder of American debt. It isn't. The greatest holder of American debt is Americans. The single greatest holder of American debt is the Social Security Trust Fund. Every time Social Security gains a surplus, it then takes that surplus and buys treasury bonds with it. It's been doing that for decades. And as a result, it is the greatest holder of American debt. The second greatest holder of American debt is the Federal Reserve. We all know that the Fed has been buying up debt in large quantities lately to keep interest rates down. The Fed is now the second greatest holder of American debt. The third large holders of American debt are state and municipal pension plans and private pension plans that have bought treasuries. And in there, somewhere in that mix, are China, Japan, Brazil, Great Britain. But the idea that China is this 800-pound gorilla breathing down our necks and poised to enslave us is a boogeyman and a Palinism right up there with the idea of death panels. The final point I want to make about the slavery issue is that there's a great misunderstanding about the nature of slavery, not only on Sarah Palin's part, but I think it's a somewhat universal misunderstanding of slavery. Slavery wasn't simply a systemic and institutionalized form of degradation and dehumanization. It was that, but it was more than that. Slavery was a Holocaust. Slavery was a genocide. What we don't think about often enough is that even though 11 million people were forcibly brought to the Americas, 4 million people died, either in transit or waiting to be carried in slave ships from Africa to the Americas. And when you look at the conditions in which they were brought, it's mind-boggling to me that anybody survived that trip. Hundreds of people under the deck, shackled to one another, packed like sardines, breathing their own waste. The situation had to be an incredible incubator for disease. So these people died of measles, and they died of smallpox, and they died of dysentery, and they died of a variety of forms of malnutrition. And one of the means of death that isn't widely recognized is on those rare occasions when slaves were given the opportunity to go above deck, more than a few committed suicide by jumping over the side of the ship. The problem became large enough so that some ships had to be equipped with nets along the side of the ships to protect the cargo, as it were. So there was a Holocaust involved, and we don't really think of it that way because we tend to think of slavery that only happened once people landed on our shores. The people that lost their lives, the 4 million people that perished, are basically forgotten because they're nameless, faceless, and stateless. We can't even apply nationality to them easily. So we don't tend to think of the African Holocaust in the same way that we think of the European Holocaust, or we think of the killing fields of Cambodia, or we think of the genocide of Rwanda, because those are very present to us. The prospective slaves who are being transported have no one to speak for them. There are no pictures of them. There are no mementos. But make no mistake about it, it was a Holocaust. And if we really saw it that way, it would be much more difficult for people to make glib and foolish analogies between today's policies and slavery. So who knows? Maybe Martin Bashir's takedown of Sarah Palin will have some benefit. Maybe conservatives will gain some wisdom and reflection and think twice about foolish comparisons to slavery. Hope springs eternal. I'm Jeff Rowan. Thanks for watching.